Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 984 just came out, and this was a great chapter, largely because of the way it ended, with what I personally believe to be the most exciting new plot development we've had in Wano in a long time. I would actually confidently say that this has been the most exciting new plot development in all of Act 3. And I'm going to get to that at the end, so if you're impatient, then, there are timestamps in the video, there's chapter stamps, you can go ahead and skip to Yamato. But I'm going to start at the beginning, with Ulti and Page One. So first of all, I'm glad that Ulti was not just taken out that easily by Yamato, because I like Ulti and I do want to see her more as, portrayed as a formidable fighter as she was when she was up against Luffy. So, Yamato one-shotting her, or seemingly one-shotting her at least, was exciting for Yamato, but I do like the fact that Ulti was not just taken out by that and she's back up and still back to her usual, somewhat arrogant, aggressive self, basically. And I'm really liking, of course, the dynamic between Ulti and Page One. With Ulti's dialogue in general, and by the way, she has basically become my favorite Toby Roppo, I think, after this chapter. Before it was between her and Who's Who, but we've only seen so much of Who's Who, so, maybe he can climb back up the rankings later. But Ulti in general, I think she benefits a lot from the Viz translations, just because she's one of those characters that the style of speech that she has, and what Oda's trying to get across with, her character gag, it makes more sense with the Viz translation. Although I do think that, the scans translation that I assume that we're all reading, it has gotten better in that regard with getting across what her dialogue is trying to do, which is basically this really drastic switch up between this more high-speaking sort of, fancy type dialogue or whatever, and then drastically changing to really blunt and aggressive and snappy. So I do think that comes across better with a different set of translations, but this one is getting the job done, and I think we did see more of that this chapter with how she was talking to Page One. And in general, that dynamic, as I've mentioned in the past, that's one of my favorite dynamics that we've seen, at least among a villain group in the series period. I don't know when the last time we had a dynamic between two henchmen of a bad guy which was as fun to watch basically as Ulti and Page One. And it's not even like Kaku and Jaibura, where it was the second and third strongest members of the CP9. Ulti and Page One, they're a couple levels down in Kaido's crew, but even with just these two, Oda's giving them a lot of fun dynamics and a lot of interesting screen time and having them bounce off each other in a really interesting way. So I'm really liking watching all of that. I generally find Ulti to be a hilarious character. Everything she said this chapter was pretty funny. But moving on from that to the actually interesting stuff, in my opinion, which is, okay, to start with, by the way, Marco mentions that there's a shadow approaching. I think we can all assume that that's Perospero. I think with this chapter now I have an idea of why Perospero is being moved along to Onigashima by himself. I don't know if I'm going to like it or dislike it, but look, so with Kaido, we had known in the past that basically Kaido's got a big announcement coming up. We know that Kaido and Big Mom are making an alliance. We know that Big Mom often likes to seal alliances with a wedding of some sort, right? That's how she likes to do it. You get the kids married, all right, now they're basically, we've teamed up officially or whatever. So with that in mind, we all kind of had the idea that basically, it seems very possible that the announcement that Kaido is going to have is that his son Yamato is going to be marrying someone among Big Mom's crew to basically make that alliance conclusive or final or whatever. And so that was something that we all kind of assumed. Now, knowing that Yamato is a girl, and she is Kaido's only kid as far as we know, and knowing that Perospero is Big Mom's firstborn son, unmarried, and he by himself is being taken over to Onigashima for unknown reasons, I do think that announcement is going to be correct, that Yamato is going to be getting married off to one of Big Mom's crew. I think it's going to be Perospero. I think Perospero is going to make it to Onigashima just in time to hear that announcement. I think Oda wanted to have Perospero there to have his reaction, basically, so it wasn't necessary for the rest of the Big Mom Pirates to make it, but Oda was like, okay, it'll be funny if we're having Yamato being announced to be married to Perospero, and Perospero, who's so against the alliance in the first place, is literally dropping in to hear his name being mentioned as a key focal point in making this happen, and he finds out he's getting married. I just think it'll be the most likely scenario, and I do hope it happens because I just think it'll be a funny scene. But actually, in general, I would hope that the announcement is something totally that I haven't expected at all, but I'm going forward with the mentality that, it's probably going to be a wedding, and at least the way that I see it, basically, I think it'll be funny if Yamato and Perospero's marriage is what's being announced there. So that's my belief on the Perospero plot line. Like, that was why I was a little confused about why he himself was going over to Onigashima solo. But it makes a little more sense to me now. I'm not sure how Marco's interference is going to affect this. Because with Marco, I'm going to stay away from, like, power stuff here, I guess. But I think most people probably believe that someone like Marco should be able to somewhat, at least from what we've seen of Perospero, and like I think where most people tend to put him at, I think we all expect someone like Marco should not have that much trouble like keeping Perospero away from Onigashima if he wanted to. So I don't really know how Marco's interference is going to affect this, because if Marco does drop in and decide to stop Perospero from getting to Onigashima, Perospero probably shouldn't make it to Onigashima. So I am surprised, like, if Oda is heading towards this idea that Perospero is going to drop in at the time of the announcement or something like that, then I would be surprised, like, why is Marco basically being pulled in to kind of get involved with the Perospero plot or whatever. Unless it's to slow Perospero down, I don't know. But that being said, I think generally the fact that all of these Scabbards are pretty much together, or the good bulk majority of them, I think that's good. That's kind of tying up loose ends. I like seeing Law's ability being used effectively. So, you know, Law actually using his fruit to be able to get everybody into Onigashima. I do think that basically, I would say that, like, seeing Izzo reunited with Kiku didn't really do anything for me. And in general, like, I don't know, maybe with the Scabbards, it's just been a little bit since we've been, you know, following them a little more heavily or whatever. There's just so much more stuff going on at this point. I personally did not feel that much when I saw Scabbards reuniting and such. And I think also a little bit of this goes back to Oden's backstory, where I did feel that we should have just spent more time on it in general, and spent more time on kind of getting to know the Scabbards a little more, getting to see them interact with each other a little more, because with such a large group, it's very difficult to get that sort of familiarity with that group of characters and really endear them to you as a group and like care about them as a group. I know that we've gotten lots of stuff about them individually over the course of Wano and Zoe and such, but to see them bond as a group and the way that they function and care about each other as a group, I do think that's very hard to get across in a very short number of chapters, especially considering that most of the Oden flashback was not focused on the Scabbards. So I think that shows here pretty much where I did not feel that much when I saw that the Scabbards reunited, especially with Izzo and Kiku. Like, my mind knows that, okay, they're brothers, but like, I don't personally feel anything seeing them being reunited. So maybe that's just me. Maybe you guys enjoyed the reunion of the Scabbards a lot more. Personally, it didn't hit that much for me. It was just a page in the chapter, basically. I still like a lot of them as individual characters. Like Nekomamushi, great character. I was happy to see the way that he was dropped in, which is kind of funny because cats normally land on their feet and everything. So, interesting stuff there. At the very least, we were moving the plot along. So then the scene at the Banquet Hall with Kaido and his 3 calamities. I just really like that double-page spread, because it's one of those things where you don't really know for sure if you're ever going to get to see Kaido and his 3 commanders ever lined up quite like that. I mean, sure, we'll see it in, like, fan art and everything, but in the actual manga itself, getting to see a big spread of Kaido, King, Queen, and Jack all lined up was just a cool visual to see. They are a pretty intimidating looking bunch. I think Oda has really nailed it with the designs for Kaido and his 3 top guys. King looks like is the shortest. We kind of get some height confirmations here. So King looks like he's the shortest, then Queen, then Jack. Then Kaido seems to be roughly Jack's height, but you can't quite tell. And I think in general, I need to see how Kaido stacks up to Big Mom, because we did get that one instance of them basically side by side. Actually, a couple instances of them side by side, and it's looked like they're about the same height. But it's still just a little bit hard to tell, because I never thought that Jack was as big as Big Mom. But now Kaido looks like he's as big as Jack, but also as big as Big Mom. You never know with heights in One Piece, but I do think that, like, at least setting the standard, okay, are we supposed to think of Kaido as around Big Mom height? Or is he significantly shorter? I do think that I just need to see them side by side a couple more times to kind of get at how Oda's kind of portraying this, you know? So I did think that was a cool double-page spread. The thing that I liked the most about the Banquet Hall scene was definitely, and this is the first panel that has actually made me laugh out loud in a long, long time. Not just in One Piece, but like in manga in general. Like, I actually read this and laughed out loud, which was the Jinbei and Robin panel. because I literally didn't realize that it was Jinbei the first time, like, as I was passing over it, right? Like, I had to do a bit of a double take and be like, what is that? Like, you know, is that Jinbei? Because he actually disguised himself pretty damn good, in my opinion, right? Because originally it was like, okay, obviously these guys are going to stick out like a sore thumb. Like, they clearly don't look like, you know, like Jinbei's a fishman. Like, how many fishmen are actually walking around? But Jinbei in this panel he passes, you know? Like, I didn't register him as Jinbei the first time that I passed over him. And, you know, if I, as the reader who knows that they're Straw Hats walking around Onigashima in disguise, didn't recognize him at first glance, then obviously the Beast Pirates aren't going to realize it, because you know how characters in One Piece, like the general public and general masses of One Piece, especially bad guy henchmen and stuff, they have like really, really like tiny pea-sized brains where they don't really process information too well, and they're basically just written as the dumbest of the dumb. So yeah, it makes total sense that these guys are going to pass and like actually slip in and perform this part of the infiltration mission pretty well. And you know, I felt that too, like when I was looking at the rest of the samurai and such in disguise over the course of the rest of the page, because if I didn't know their thought bubbles, right, obviously the thought bubbles give them away that they are on the protagonist's side and everything like that. They're talking about Momonosuke. But if I didn't know that, then I would have kind of just assumed that, okay, these are other, you know, Kaido, Beast Pirate, Onigashima type fodder or whatever. So I think that, you know, maybe initially when the transformations were happening, like, it's kind of like, well, aren't they going to be recognized? Like, how much do these transformations actually, or like these these clothing changes actually help? But, you know, it fooled me for a second, I'd say. I generally don't like Robin in these sort of situations where Robin's like being used for this type of comedy. I could talk more on this, but I'll just basically say that, like, Oda has kind of started, like, at least post-time skip with Robin, Oda has been using the thing of, like, you know, when Robin has, you know, reactions or, like, gag faces, like the ha moment, like, stuff like that's been happening a lot more recently. Like, the joke is basically, like, look how out of character this is for Robin, isn't that funny? That, like, oh, Robin's reacting like this, Robin's acting like this, stuff like that. At this point, it doesn't feel like, it's not even funny to me. It's not like out of character for Robin anymore, because he's just so consistently written her as basically not the same person as she was pre-time skip. And I generally don't like that, because that kind of, like, you could say that that's development, but Robin was developed well by the end of Enies Lobby and Thriller Bark and everything like that. Like, she was fine where she was at that point. Like, her main character conflict was closed. She was no longer as distant as she was before. She went along more with the way the Straw Hats acted and behaved and everything like that. She was more lighthearted, but she was still herself. Now it's like she's a different person. Like, that's not good development in my mind necessarily. Like, you can write Robin gags really well with the person that she was before. The best Robin gag in the series isn't anything post-time skip. It's still when Frankie's saying, let's all do docking, the entire Straw Hat crew's coming together to do docking, and Robin, being true to her character, is saying, there's no way I'm doing that. That's literally an embarrassment for me as a human being. That's great Robin humor. Like, you can write her in funny scenarios and stuff while still keeping her true to her character. Like, Oda's kind of just, it's more homogenization than anything. Like, he's just writing her to blend in more and more with the rest of the Straw Hats and, like, doing the same things that the rest of them would do, which has just stopped feeling funny or out of character to me. But again, that being said, like, I was laughing when she did it here, mostly because of Jinbei. But, you know, like, I didn't mind it as much when she did it here, but I felt like I had to give, like, a bit of a side rant on why, like, I don't think Robin humor or, like, writing her like that is funny anymore and actually takes away from what made her character so interesting and unique among the group earlier in the series. So now let's get to the part of the chapter that I really, really, really liked, which was Yamato. Or Yamato versus Luffy, or, you know, yeah, let's start with Yamato versus Luffy, but not for the reasons that you think. I think that the fact that Oda had written Yamato as a girl, but decided to introduce her without us knowing that she's a girl and actually framing it as Yamato's Kaido's son. We're looking for Kaido's son, Yamato's a guy, all that stuff. I think that that was a really, really good decision. I don't even know if Oda realizes this or not, but, like, there was a really good secondary effect besides the shock factor for choosing to hide Yamato's gender, which is basically, I think anytime, like, we all know that One Piece is more so a male character dominated series. The stronger characters in general are almost always male. I think generally when a female character is introduced who is supposed to be strong, right? Like, there is a lot of, like, it's easy to feel biased. Like, okay, it's like, how is Oda going to handle this character? Like, we felt that, like, Smoothie did not get her due justice or whatever during Whole Cake Island. Maybe she will get that in Wano, hopefully, or whatever. But there's just generally lots of bias that can come in with when you're seeing a female character that Oda's writing in who is supposed to be strong, and you're looking at it like, okay, how is she being written, right? Like, is Oda actually treating her like a strong character or whatever? And, you know, it's easy to make assumptions, like, for example, even someone like Big Mom, who is the strongest woman in the world, right? Just knowing Oda and how he is, I think when we found out that Big Mom was a female Yonko, I think most of us did kind of jump to basically, okay, it's likely that she's the weakest of the bunch. And sure, maybe she's stronger than Blackbeard right now or whatever, we don't know. But I think at least looking at the original Yonko, I think most people would kind of, like, even if we didn't get as far into the story as we've gotten, I think most people would have guessed that it's probably, like, Whitebeard, Kaido, and Shanks are stronger than Big Mom or whatever. Like, I think most people would have bet money that Big Mom is the weakest Yonko. Even if we didn't get a lot of information about her, just knowing that she's a female, and just knowing that the way that Oda tends to write women in the story, like, he doesn't always put them as, you know, the strongest characters. So with Yamato, right, like, let's say Yamato had been introduced to us as a girl, then we're going to be, I think, you know, every power interaction is always, like, heavily scrutinized in One Piece. That's just the way we are. But we would be doubling down on that if she was introduced as a woman, basically. Like, with the Ulti moment, Thunder Bagua, I think there'd be twice as much discussion about, like, okay, like, how much stock do we put into this? Like, Ulti was taken by surprise, like, what does this mean, etc., etc. And then with Yamato and Luffy, it'd be like, okay, how much was Luffy trying? Like, okay, obviously he's not going, like, serious or anything like that. There's just, like, a lot of little ways that I think there'd be more scrutiny over it. But because we are under the framework that Yamato's a guy, right, there's less bias or judgment going into these initial displays of power. So, you know, the Ulti moment, we all immediately were like, damn, Yamato might be really, really strong. Like, I don't know how strong, but it looks like he might be really, really strong. And then early in the chapter, when I'm seeing, at least from my perspective, when I'm seeing, okay, Luffy's not in gear 4th, but it looks like he's going pretty decently hard, like, outside of using gear 4th. And it looks like he's being handled pretty well, like, somewhat easily. Like, if I had to bet, like, if I had to say who seems like, you know, they're better off in this scenario, I would say Yamato. I would say Yamato's, like, not breaking as much of a sweat. Not to say that Luffy couldn't win if he, like, went all out. Obviously, if he used gear 4th, I would put my money on him. But, like, Yamato looked really, really good there. Like, Yamato looked like the advantaged party in that little back and forth, at least to me. At least with these translations that we have right now. And so then after that, when it's revealed, like, when we're under the impression that, man, how strong is Yamato? Like, is Yamato, like, would he be among the calamities or commanders or whatever? Like, when we get the perspective to start off with that, look, Yamato's really, really strong. Even compared to Luffy, he looks really strong. And, like, he's a clear challenge for Luffy. And then it's revealed that Yamato's a girl. That's much more of, like, a pleasant surprise than it would have been otherwise, where we know that she's a girl from the start, basically. So I think that was just, like, a really good way to introduce the character so that we're free of bias as we're reading about it. And then we learn that she's, like, that first we learn that it's a really strong character, and then we learn that it's a girl, rather than being told from the start that it's a strong female character, basically. So, yeah, generally I think that Oda planned that introduction out really well. I don't know if he was even aware of that secondary effect that it would have, like hiding the gender, up till the reveal. I don't know if he just thought that the reveal would be shocking, or more shocking if it's revealed it's a girl down the line just for shock value, but I do think that there was that secondary effect, intended or not. Now, in general, the reason that I said at the start that this was the most, I guess, exciting new plot development in One Piece for me that there's been in a long while, at least in Wano Act 3, is because generally, how do I say this? So, generally there's been, this is the first time that I feel like a whole new avenue of the direction that Wano could go has really opened up that feels fresh and different than what we've been kind of, like, getting the seeds of in the past. Because when Yamato was initially introduced as a concept, oh, Kaido has a son, I wonder how important the son's gonna be, for me it was, okay, that's interesting, but it's almost at the same time feels unnecessary. Because it was like, we've already got so much going on in Wano there was a very real possibility that having, Kaido's son thrown into the mix, like, at the time we were all sure that, okay, he's going to have interactions with Momonosuke. And that's still totally possible, by the way. Like, the gender change doesn't really affect that in any way. But we all thought that, it's going to be possible that it's more interactions with Momonosuke that develops Momonosuke's plotline, which, to be frank, most people don't care that much about in the first place. But it just felt like, okay, it's another factor being thrown into an arc that's already very heavy in terms of characters and plot threads and everything like that. And at the time, it was just like, do we need this, or does this just add to the noise of the general Wano arc, right? Like, will the Yamato stuff just become, just more, it just adds to the generally heavily saturated nature of this arc? Like, does it just become more noise? But by making Yamato a girl, that helps this whole plot line and what she could be in the context of Wano. It helps that stand out from the noise, and it actually turns it into a very fresh potential plot line for the arc. Just because we've known for a while that Wano is a very traditional sort of society, even among the samurai, the 9 Scabbards and such. Like, we got Shinobu down the line, but in the original 9 Scabbards, there are no women. Like, even Kiku, who seemed like one, ended up being a guy, biologically. We generally have gotten the sense that Wano is a very traditional sort of culture. And similar stuff, like going back to Kuina, even at the start of the series, who wanted to be a swordsman. Like, she ultimately decided that, okay, if I were a guy, then I would be stronger and everything like that. So generally, we haven't delved into that stuff as much in Wano, of, any sort of, gender discussion or anything like that. But with Yamato being revealed as she is, and the fact that she chose to be a man because she associated that with strength, and she is very, very strong without actually biologically being a man, but she chose to identify as one basically because she associated that with strength, basically seeing Kazuki Oden and everything like that. That opens up a very interesting new angle, basically, of what Wano could, like, another idea that Wano could start focusing on more. Not to mention that basically, again, as I talked about with the wedding stuff, this changes up who Yamato could potentially be wed to, and in general, it just feels like the decision to make her a girl instead of just a son, like the straightforward route, basically, right? Like, you would call that the straightforward route for One Piece, like, okay, introducing the child of a strong character who's also going to carry a plot. You would just assume it's a son, but Oda kind of made a big deal of hiding the fact that she's a woman, and then chose to reveal it down the line. Like, I don't think that's just a gotcha sort of moment. I do think that, like, there is a conscious decision to make this character a girl that will play out over the rest of the arc in a direction that, like this is the first time I don't really know what Oda is going to do. Not to say I know what Oda is going to do with all sorts of stuff. Obviously, like, I don't know anything, right? And, like, none of us know anything that's going to develop. But it's the first thing that, like, I literally have no clue, like, what Oda is going to do with this character and what role she is going to play now. Because with Yamato before as a guy, it would have just been more likely to blend in as one of the other plot lines, whereas this now feels like, wait, why is it so important that she's a woman? What is this going to mean for the rest of the arc, kind of? So I'm very excited for that reason, and the fact that, the Ace stuff comes in, and that's totally separate from her gender. Like, it wasn't just a throwaway fact that Ace showed up to Wano, right? It sounds like this is going to be something that is developed further. And also the fact that, like, Yamato apparently had a very, from what it sounds like, when Yamato was telling Luffy earlier that, I used to fight with this person a lot, it sounds like she's talking about Ace, right? Because she's talking about someone that Luffy was very similar to. Later on down the arc, later on down the chapter, she also mentions, this is just like Ace. It sounds like she's talking about Ace in both these instances, basically. Just based on the similarity of what she's talking about in both those instances. And the fact that, like, Ace showed up in Wano, I could imagine Ace giving Yamato a good fight. They were probably both younger at that time. I've seen people say that, like, she was talking about Oden, which makes no sense. Oden was her idol. She would probably have been very young at the time that Oden would... There's no way that she fought with Oden many times, and that was just omitted from Oden's story. That doesn't really make sense. Oden was fighting Kaido's daughter for, like, those 5 years? Doesn't really make sense. So it definitely sounds as though her and Ace had a lot of clashes and everything like that. I wonder if it's... Never mind, I'm going to save this for, like, another video, basically. I'm going to leave that thought for another video. Maybe you can expect it Monday. I don't know. But maybe I'll record it right after this one. But yeah, in general, I do think that basically that opens up a whole new route. I do think it'd be really interesting to see what the fact that like Ace is actually becoming pretty prominent in Wano is going to mean. And you guys know that I've said for a while that like I believe that the Fire Festival, or like this whole raid, nobody calls it the Fire Festival anymore, I believe that this whole raid will end in failure. I do think that the fact that Ace is coming more and more into prominence over the course of this arc and being mentioned more is going to be important to that, because Luffy's like one and honestly only great failure in the series was Ace, right? Like that was the point of it. That was his first true great, like irreversible sort of failure. He's failed. He's like lost in such multiple times throughout the story, but Ace was Luffy's first truly irreversible sort of failure. Like it was an absolute defeat, right? Like even with the straw at Tsubodi, that was different in that he could get his crew back. With Ace, that was not the case. So again, I do think that the fact that we're building up to, I shouldn't say the fact, I do think that the notion that we're building up to a great defeat and the fact that Ace is going to be frequently mentioned in this arc, and we might be getting some more Ace backstory, side note, the fact that Ace is being mentioned more frequently in this arc, I do think that these things could be connected in some sort of way that I can't see yet, but I do wonder if Oda is bringing up Luffy's greatest failure more frequently as we approach a moment where Luffy will experience something similar to that again. Only this time Luffy will have to come back from it and ultimately do better the second time around. So that's what I'm looking forward to, and you know, with Ace's backstory, I do think it's really exciting that we have the potential of actually getting to see more of Ace, not really as a kid, because obviously we got to see lots of Ace as a kid in his flashback, but to see more of Ace, you know, as most fans remember and like him, which was basically Ace the teenager, or, you know, Ace, whatever age he was, basically, in his prime, sort of, like, in his prime as a pirate. And basically who Ace was a little bit before he joined the Whitebeard Pirates, because I think he went to Wano before he joined the Whitebeard Pirates. So, a lot of interesting stuff coming out from this chapter. That's all for this video. If you enjoyed, then definitely like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you all later.